thing that we're going to talk about today is we're actually going to do a coaching call around podcast and podcast planning, because you don't currently have a podcast, or you want to start a podcast. Is that right?
I want to start up a old podcast that I've kind of let slide.
Okay, cool. And
well, so, I mean, that's actually up for discussions.
Excellent.
Do I?
All right. Well, yeah. Let's get into it.
Welcome to The Recognized Authority, a podcast that helps specialized consultants and domain experts on your journey to become known as an authority in your field. Here is your host, Alastair McDermott.
And if just for context for anybody who doesn't know, I've written a book called 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Your Business Podcast, which is probably why Nina thought that she would want to talk to me about this. So that's just for some context. Let's get into it. Can you tell me a bit more about what you'd like to do now, and what your goals are for the podcast?
Yeah. So the podcast that I did, and I started it about nearly 3 years ago, was kind of a due diligence exercise. It's like everybody was doing podcasts. I'm a video marketer, so I did a vlogcast. By the way, side note, drives me bananas when people call it a podcast and it's actually a vlogcast, but you know, that's just me. So it was a really lovely, fairly easy affair. Did it twice a month. Invited all the interesting people I talk to all the time, be it that they're clients or prospects or just from networking opportunities. And we did that for about a year and a half. And then the virtual assistant, or she was much more than that, who left me, who was setting this all up for me, and left me with a very nice standard operating procedure. But it became a chore after that. And so I slugged myself through another year and a half of doing it by myself, only once a month now. And I felt that it was just like it had run its course. I think there's certain serialized content that is fantastic. And then at some point, just, you know, there's the needle in the balloon and it just like, you know, empties out and there's not much left. And then, I started being privy to more tools being out there to make podcasting now audio only much easier. So I've, been thinking that now that my Real Talk with Nina, as it was called, and real spelled R-E-E-L, because video, ha ha ha. And I'm just felt like, all right, I either need to just ditch the whole thing because I have more than enough content. I'm not lacking in content. I'm not lacking in thought leadership because I can create that with videos. But I do miss the conversations. I do miss the opportunity to invite people into something that are potential clients that I want to sort of bring in a little more. And it was just, other than creating the assets, it was actually fun. So I figured if I do it again, I want to do it right. So I want to make sure it ties in with my ecosystem. I want to make sure it's not just some random thing. I want to make sure it's branded right. And I want to make sure I'm thinking it should be much shorter. The old one was a live that was simulcast, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. Facebook, I couldn't care less about. LinkedIn is my jam. And YouTube was just great because then it could go right into a playlist and we're done, right? So if I do it again, I just want to be smarter and more intentional about it, and also explore things like, is this still a 45-minute affair, or is this actually sort of more of a commuter length, 20-minute affair? What can I do in 20 minutes? I'm a storyteller, so I like to go long-winded, all that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm at. So I have no title yet. I have no concept yet, but I do know what my audience wants and kind of what kind of people I attract. So I have clear ideas about that.
Cool. Okay. So there's a couple of things that stand out there. So shortening the format, this is one that I find that people argue about all the time, because some people say, oh, people don't listen to long format. They don't listen to, long shows. Like I have podcast episodes that are over an hour long, and the numbers of downloads are just as good, if not better, than some of the short episodes. Yep. Joe Rogan is out there with a 3-hour podcast. There are other people out there with very long form. And what long form lets you do is go really deep on a topic. And you what I find is you can just get in a conversation, you can actually explore some of the things that you never would get a chance to, particularly when you're interviewing an expert. And I think that's what's interesting, because if you listen to the same expert being interviewed on 10 short form podcasts, they'll probably say the same thing mostly, because they never get time to go beyond the surface. Whereas if you listen to them on some longer form podcasts, you tend to find that they're able to go deeper because the host is able to explore some of the interesting questions. And that's what I like about the longer form stuff. I think it's like what you like to do and what works for you. I think people will listen to it. People will find a way to listen to it.
That's very good feedback. I mean, I as I said, I'm a storyteller. I'm a documentary filmmaker. So when you interview a subject for a doc, you don't give yourself a time limit, right? You dig until you get the gold. And the gold very often comes an hour in or whatever, right? So, and then there's also those people who just, I interviewed an expert a couple of months ago who had talking points, and he would not veer from those talking points. And I'm sure that I could have interviewed him for 3 hours and we would still have been on the same 5 talking points, right? So that was an interview I actually cut short, right? But that's the exception, for sure. So longer form. I mean, then the beauty of longer format is also you get more out of it, right? You get more detail. You can get more clips, because the way I'm going to use. So this is the other part. Like if I'm doing this, I want to. The question is, do I even bother with a podcast? Do I need to bother with a podcast? So audio only. Do I want to deal with the show notes and all that? I kind of don't, because I don't have a VA who can do that for me right now. I have VAs that have other skill sets. I want to do, a short version, like short clips. You gave me the idea of a highlight reel, which I've never done before, but I think that could be really sexy. And you could do super shorts, like short shorts, like under 1 minute. So I want to for me, it's not just about the show. For me, it's also about exploring new topics to talk about with the help of these clips.
Right. And the assets, the other assets that it can create for you.
Well, so, I mean, yes, and it can be written stuff, right? Because you have a transcript. It can be, the resources. I mean, it can be stills. I mean, you can skin the cat any which way you want. Sorry, your cat owner. Sorry. Yeah. You can skin the cat every which way you want.
Yeah. So, okay. So in terms of overall goals, so what I'm hearing for you is you don't need it to create thought leadership authority type content, because you already have a lot of that. Although that's a nice kind of side effect. Yeah. You do want it to create all of those kind of extra content assets, like the short video clips and things like that, which obviously I'm very pro doing that, because I think it's a great way to create content that's very engaging. And Instagram and TikTok in particular, but also I think LinkedIn are starting to really get on the video train now as well. And you can probably speak to that. But, I think that kind of content is definitely more engaging. People are more interested in seeing the expert or thought leader appearing on camera on a video than just reading the text.
Yeah. So I think.
So let's see.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You don't particularly care about something like monetization through sponsorship or anything like that. That's not an issue here.
That's actually a good point you're bringing up. I don't care about the monetization, although money is never bad. But I do want to get a sponsor, even just because I think a sponsor would elevate the podcast or vlogcast. I think I have a friend that is in a pod with me, in a LinkedIn pod with me. And he found himself a sponsor for his weekly, so he does it much more often, his weekly live on LinkedIn. And it's a tit for tat sponsor, right? They don't give him any money, but they give him, he gets sort of the kudos of, I've got a sponsor. They get more ears and eyeballs on their stuff. I think a sponsor definitely elevates a podcast significantly. even if the sponsor is Clockwise Productions, which is my company. But I'm also thinking you could be a sponsor with your fabulous new product, right? With the podcast editing tools.
Authority Accelerator.
Thank you for giving it a name. What's it called? What accelerator?
Authority Accelerator.
Authority Accelerator. I mean, you would be a great sponsor, right? So, I mean, I think having a sponsor is definitely a goal to have. Yes.
Right. So it's a third party endorsement, effectively.
Yeah. I think it's more the endorsement than if a couple of bucks are in it as well, fine. I'm not going to say no. But I think it's just great to have that kind of, I think it just ups the value of the show. And that's the other thing. Until now, I've been inviting whoever I could grab. I would love to also be more strategic with my invites. Yeah.
So the interesting thing about having a podcast and calling it a podcast is it's a very understandable platform for people. So when you're inviting them, you're saying, I have a podcast, it's a weekly podcast, and I'm going to invite you on. It doesn't really matter if the format also happens to be live or video as well. The thing is that it's very easy for people to understand when you're reaching out to to a business leader who's busy. They understand, okay, I'm going to be interviewed if I come on here. So they know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've invited people into my live show. I found that to be, I've never had people push back or say, I don't know what that is or what that looks like. Yeah. A vlogcast, I could see that confusing,
I think that for me, what podcast implies more than a live show, and maybe I'm wrong with this, but what it implies to me is it implies consistent, regular scheduling. And that I find interesting, that people then make the podcast part of their weekly routine if it is something like weekly. And so they know the podcast is going to be in their podcast player. For me, it's every Monday morning. It goes live at 6:01 a.m. Irish time. And so every Monday morning, it's there in their podcast player. And I know, for example, Joe Jacoby, one of my former guests, I know because I regularly get message from him on Monday morning, just after I get up out of bed, because my podcast went out before I got out of bed. But I get a message from him saying, hey, that was a great conversation. I was driving to Barcelona and I listened to it, for example. And it becomes part of their routine and the convenience. The part that the podcast, the audio part gives you, is it gives you access to being in people's pockets, on their phone, on their car dashboard.
And that's why I'm thinking about it. Yeah, because that is a huge advantage. Like everybody I know who has a vlogcast and vlogcast only, I don't really listen to them because I'm not going to sit another half an hour or hour at my computer. And then, sometimes I'll do like a graphic project or an art project, and I might listen to a podcast, but I'm not necessarily going to listen to a business podcast while I'm doing some artwork, right? So it just, but driving, I actually queue up a playlist. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And I have binge listened. Like I need to learn about webinars, for example. And there's a webinar expert. He hasn't been around for a while, but he was around a few years ago, called Stephen Essa. And I heard him being interviewed. And so what I did was I went into my podcast player and I searched for him being interviewed on all of these different podcasts. And I listened to him being interviewed about webinars. And I listened to 5 different interviews. And by the time I got to the end of that journey, I knew exactly how he does it and what his process is. And he used all these different examples through, which was great because it meant that, I got this different perspective. So that was like a masterclass. And so what stuck with me is I've always wanted my podcast episodes where I'm interviewing experts. I want them to be like that. I want them to be really actionable, learning, educational. So that's what I'm going for with this podcast, is that people who are listening to it really get something from it and can take something away and actually implement that in their business, like an idea that, that because there's listening for education, and it's totally different to listening for entertainment. And I think that we should have a bit of both. Like, I think that we should try to be conversational and entertaining, and have fun with it as well, because I don't like business to be all business. But we're trying to help people, and we're trying to get people to take some kind of action to move forward with whatever the problem is that they have that they're trying to solve. So that's just how I think about the educational aspect of the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely, I think a balance of both is important. And, case in point, not my entertainment is not your entertainment, right? If we say sort of in the knowledge world, for the most part, then we know we're in a safe area that is of interest to our listener, because they wouldn't have listened into it to begin with if their interest was in early childhood education, right? And I'm talking about, video marketing. So I at least know I'm hitting we always say, like, with the binge-worthy content, it has to be timely, it has to be engaging, and it has to be educational. And if we can hit the timely and educational, then we're golden. And if we also get the entertainment or the engaging part down pat, then even better, right? So
yeah, and one thing you mentioned there that I just think is important to mention is it's okay to be personally revealing, and that does, like, even if your entertainment is not my entertainment, still revealing some of that, it brings authenticity and personality to it. Like, for example, we discussed before the show, you were talking about your dog, and I said, hey, well, we've got 2.5 cats because there's a cat hanging around outside who's enjoying itself in the sun out there in our backyard. So but things like that, those kind of things make a connection. People pick up on those details and just get to know, and so they're painting a picture of you. And when they've listened to 200 episodes, they do have a relationship built with you in their head. It's called a parasocial relationship, where they feel like they know you, and they probably do. They probably have quite a good idea of what you're like, So I think the other thing about the podcast is typically, and I believe very strongly in recording video now and recording on video. But I think that there is something about when somebody is listening to your words in their ear, on their earphones, or whatever way they're listening to you, there's an intimacy to the audio only that you don't get with the video one. Now, I understand video has lots of pluses, and I'm talking to a video marketer, so I know you get this, and video is very powerful. But I think that audio can also be very powerful. Audio only can be very powerful as well, and so that's why I think I like to dual purpose it. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I think it's just a convenience of, we have so many hours a day, be it when we're, chopping up, veggies for dinner, or in my case, I'm on a dog walk, or I'm driving somewhere. Not as a New Yorker, I don't drive regularly, but I do. But, there's, or, even, commuting in the subway, whatever. There's many opportunities where we can easily also be doing something else. And that's where the podcasts come in. But what I'm worried about is, like, with a live show on LinkedIn, which is what I have been doing, I schedule it at a time where I know I'm getting engagement because I'm in engagement pods. And then I know that, LinkedIn, I just get X amount of people who comment on my stuff because I have a loyal following, and I have a name, and I have authority. I'm a little nervous about going on, I don't even know what the name of all the different softwares are, but on Stitcher or on, Apple Podcasts, and just be, posting to, complete crickets. Mm-hmm. Right. So the fear there is that you're putting the podcast out and you're not getting big downloads off of the podcast itself. Yeah, but you're getting good numbers on your live, but you're not getting a lot on the podcast. Is that the concern?
Yeah, I mean, my concern is that I would now I'm starting yet another new platform. That is, and platforms plural, right? Because these podcasts go, nilly-willy wherever, and then how much? So I've never done a podcast, so how labor intense is it? What about the show notes? That's something I totally do not want to deal with. What about the links? Because none of that I'm really dealing with when I'm doing a live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, for a live, you still got to write some show notes, although typically you're going to write them in advance. And, as an episode descriptor to say, hey, this event is upcoming. And
yeah, which I have to do for my lives anyway as well.
Yeah.
So that'll be the same work. Okay.
Yeah. So there is, like, it is similar. And there is a little bit of work that does need to be done there. And the good news is you can delegate and automate a lot of it. And I would suggest that you do that. And even if it's just a person, a VA or a podcast producer who just does the show notes and posting the episodes, but there's so much of it that can be chained together with automation, like Zapier and all of these other systems. For example, I use a piece of software called Ophonic, which is an online service which does audio leveling. And what that does is that makes sure that particularly we've got two people speaking here, me and you, and our audio gain might be set to different levels. And so what it does is it just normalizes everything and makes sure that the speakers are both speaking at the same volume on it so that we don't have one dropping out. There's little things like that. But that service, Ophonic, when I put the audio in there, it also automatically goes off to get transcribed. And it also gets copied up into Google Drive. And now we don't currently do this, but we could have it kick off and actually automatically publish the episode. So there's all of that you can chain together to set it up so that it's literally hands off for you. And so what you do is, you're done with your recording and you say, okay, and you can actually do this even now. You can do this with the MP4 video. So you can drop the video up onto, again, Ophonic or one of these types of services. And I don't know if there are other services. I just use that one because it works for me. Yeah. But you can even drop the video up there and it will split the audio out for you and normalize it and compress it down to a nice high quality but low file size MP3 for you. And that will then kick off. And in fact, you can even do it so that you can add an intro and outro automatically if you have those recorded as separate files. So there's a lot of the kind of production work can be taken off of your hands. So you don't have to, that you can delegate to automation, to a machine, to Zapier, or to a person. And I think that you want to, you should not be doing editing. You should not be doing production work. You should be doing the more strategic. For me, the ideal scenario is I invite the guest because I don't want to outsource that part of it. I want to invite the guest myself, and then I want to show up for the interview. And that is all that I want to do. And I want to delegate everything else, be completely hands off. And that's where it is for me. But I think it's really important that as a business owner, as a business leader, as somebody whose time is limited, that we're not spending huge amounts of time on the detail that can be done by automations.
Yeah. I mean, for my life, I had an excellent standard operating procedure. The only thing I ended up doing myself was I did the graphics myself and the writing of the blurb. And it was only once a month, and it only took me about an hour. And every month, that 1 hour became sort of the albatross, like the one chore, right, that I hated doing. And I kept saying, my business would be perfect if I didn't have to do that 1 hour a month. And it's just one freaking hour. But I'm kind of like, if I'm doing this and I'm starting this up again, I want to make sure, because now I'm adding elements rather than making it. I'm going to definitely make the graphic creation easier. It was in Photoshop before. I mean, I know Photoshop really well, but I just don't want to go in there. I want to have it on Canva or on Adobe. Yeah. One of those, quick and easy online things where anybody with a half a brain can mimic what I've done and not be fully proficient on some really complicated software.
I'm a huge fan of Canva. And I know that Canva now you can even do, you can upload a CSV file to Canva and it will bulk generate slides and things for you. So, and then there's other tools that you can use, you could actually have ChatGPT connected to Google Sheets. And so that you can basically teach you can use those and drag out so you can basically drag out your ChatGPT requirements, just down a spreadsheet, the way you expand a spreadsheet. It's insane what you can do with some of these tools. And a lot of these are going to take just that grunt work that we should not be doing. Particularly as business owners, we should not be doing that, and it's going to take that out of our hands, which is good.
It's just going to be a matter of learning it, right?
Yeah, and there are tools, like there are services out there, and I've tried a few of the podcast show note services. In fact, I've tried about 7 or 8 of them, and I was never really happy with any of them. I was creating all of the show notes. It was the one thing that I was doing. I had a templated formula. If you look back at my show notes, you'll see that they're all very, particularly in season 1 prior to episode 100, they were very formulaic in terms of the layout. But what I found was that the show notes generation just wasn't good enough. But it's only going to improve from where it's at right now. So it is going to get better, and you can use ChatGPT and other tools to create those show notes. And it's just a question of figuring out the right prompts to use and figuring out what the input is that you're giving. Because with podcast transcripts, they tend to be too long to upload and have ChatGPT in particular because of its data limits. But there are ways to do it. So you can, what you can do is you can have it, generate 5 different versions of the show notes for you, and then you just pick the best one. There are options like that,
Yeah. Do you have a checklist of all the things that go into a podcast?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, I have a workflow. I have an internal workflow, and I tend to do a lot of my documentation in Google spreadsheets, to be honest. So I have sheets that have SOPs and things like that. We have some of it in Asana as well. And, but when I'm building out a workflow for the first time, I tend to build it out in Google Sheets because it's much more malleable and you can kind of tweak it a bit. And once we have it nailed down, then I'll get Aiko to build that out in Asana as a project template. But I don't want to do that until we've done it quite a few times, so we know we have the process nailed down. Because otherwise, what you're doing is you're creating it and then you're tweaking it, and you have to change the template, and it's a pain.
Yeah. No, I've learned my lesson to never do an SOP too soon, right? Yeah, I'm right now. I have my SOPs in like a table format as well, and I just keep tweaking it. And I'm right now, as long as I don't have a VA to hand it over to, I'm not going to solidify it because, as you said, it gives me the flexibility to make changes to it. So
another tool that I've used is Loom. So I use Loom to document the procedure. So showing somebody how to do the SOP. But Loom also does transcripts now. And I've taken the transcript from Loom, fed that into ChatGPT and said, please turn this into an SOP document instruction list.
And they did a good job at it?
Surprisingly good, yeah.
Oh, so, I'll have to try it. I'm a big fan of Dub, and I'm affiliated with Dub, but same thing as Loom. Just slightly different, So then the big 2 questions, there's the practical side of it, and I'm a producer. So the practical side doesn't really scare me. I'm just very realistic as to knowing, what the work is going to be that goes into it. Yeah. So on the creative side, my questions would be around, okay, so let's say we stick with the 40 to 55 minute format, which is what I have had. And I always found that to be a nice, like there's guests that are a little less chatty. So, I'm done after 35 minutes.
Yeah, that's okay.
And that's okay. And then there's guests who, there's just like this layering and layering and layering where, at 55 minutes, I'm like, shit, I'm not even halfway down the road with them. But always, that's the person you invite again. So let's say we stay with that length format and we originate with a live, because I think that's a nice way to originate.
So you're recording live on some services. And so I personally use restream.io now. That's the one that I use. And what that does is that allows you to multicast to all of the different, so you can go onto LinkedIn, Facebook.
Yeah, that's what I do with StreamYard.
So it's the same thing, StreamYard. I don't know if StreamYard allows this. It probably does, but I like the fact that it allows my guest to add in their Facebook and their LinkedIn, and it can also broadcast to theirs. So that's kind of cool.
It does. It depends on which level you have. I have it depends on how much you pay to see, but that is something I could definitely explore. I'm on the lowest level. So that brings me to sort of the other side of the conversation is the content side of the conversation. Yeah. So and there's like for me 3 buckets that I'm kind of, and those are the real big like sort of things I'm gnawing at, which is a title.
Yeah.
B, what kind of guests and how am I upping my guest list? So I did a trial. I've done several trials, women only, Queen Ages only. Then I did other video marketers only. Other video marketers do not make for good, not make for good talkers. I learned. There's some exceptions, but in general, other video marketers are a boring bunch. So I'm like, no.
Can I suggest something on that one?
Yeah.
I think that interviewing your peers, which is effectively what you're doing there, is interesting. But I think that the problem that some people have, and I don't know if this applies to you or not, but the problem that some people have when they're interviewing their peers is when the interviewer is a generalist, the guest who's coming on kind of feels like, well, you do all this already, so what do we have to talk about? You're not really getting into something detailed with me. We're both covering the same topic. So I think that if you approach your peers, that you have to get really specific and say, look, my thing is this and your thing is that. So let's get on and talk about how those interact or how those work together and position each other as the expert in our own thing. So again, I don't know if that applies to you and what's gone on previously, or it could just be that they were terrible guests. So
I mean, they weren't terrible, but I think it's also maybe seeing, I think there's two things going on there. Number one, we did focus on their specialty different than mine, but I think it's probably not seeing the label from within the box, number one. Yeah. And number two, I am super opinionated. You know me well enough to know that about me. I'm super opinionated, and there's a way to do things right, and that's the Nina way. So when I sometimes have a guest who does what I do and I disagree with them, I get myself into trouble. So not that I would disagree with them officially on the show, but then I get careful, and the moment I'm not myself and not like sort of just Nina being Nina. So, and that might be the vibe they're picking up on. So, so maybe I just shouldn't interview. I think I did better when I interviewed people that had really interesting things they were doing that were adjacent to my stuff or complemented my stuff, or, were still of general interest to my audience, whom I know very well, without crossing over into what I do, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's just talk about the audience for a minute, because like we talked about your goals. In terms of the audience, so you're creating the podcast, we really want, like, I think that the audience getting value from the podcast, be it entertainment or education, is super important. And so from that perspective, what are they going to get out of it? And how does that, because we want to frame that against what you're going to get out of it, which is creating all this content and building an audience, things like that.
So I think for the listener, I think the value would be twofold. One is to listen to someone who really is a thought leader. So that's why I'm saying upping my guest game a bit. So like, when you had, my God, you had that one guy on, and now I'm blanking terribly, January of this year or last year. You had a famous guy on who wrote a book, and I was totally all over him.
That describes quite a few of my guests. So I've had Mark Schaefer, he's pretty well known. Chris Doe, Marcus Sheridan. I've had quite a few.
Totally blanking. He was so great. I'm blanking on his name. Anyway, so having for me to know you and know you quite well at this point ish, and know that you're interviewing this person, that is something I'm definitely going to listen to, because now this famous person is coming in closer to my own orbit, right? It's not like the 2-hour interview he would be doing with a Brian Solis, but it is sort of my friend Alastair interviewing famous person XYZ. That makes it really interesting to me. And that is, and famous is within the eye of the beholder, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Like most of the so-called famous people that I've had on the podcast, like if they walk down the street, most nobody doesn't know who they are, That's just the way it works in our world.
But this is in our ecosystem, right? And my ecosystem is service-based entrepreneurs, mostly coaches and consultants, authors and speakers. We geek out sort of on the same people. We all sort of geek out on the same problems, like, how to get more people to buy our courses, see us as the person to spend their hard-earned and sometimes very hard-earned money on, and why we in our ecosystem and our thought leadership is the person to spend our time and resources with. And so bringing in people who are doing it successfully and having done it successfully for a while is really attractive, because they can bring a perspective beyond the, oh, brouhaha, here I am and this is how cool I am, right? So the game, upping the game to me is who in our ecosystem is aspirational ahead of us without being Gary Vee or Brian Solis, who are so far down the road that, in my case, I'm like, unless I'm turning 200 years old, I'm never going to catch up to these guys, right? Nor do I want to. But somebody who's like a couple of steps ahead of me is having a solid, let's say, 7-figure business and is doing well, even if it's the single 7-figure business, that is really aspirational, right?
Yeah. So, okay. So there are particularly high caliber guests that you can get to come on. Like, for example, Alan Weiss wrote every book in consulting. I think he's written 65 books, but he wrote The $1 Million Consultant. And so he would not have come on my show if I had not interviewed, for example, David C. Baker. And David C. Baker wouldn't.
David C. Baker. That's the guy. I'm a big fan. So
author
big, I forgot
of
his name.
The Business of Expertise. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but David wouldn't have come on the show if I hadn't had Philip Morgan on, because Philip was the person who recommended he come on the show. So there's a whole chain, and this is where you can connect, like you can see who connects to who.
6 degrees of separation, right?
Yeah, but I do think, like, it is nice to get high profile people on, but the higher the profile doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get more listens. Because a lot of their audience, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And I have had guests where I didn't expect them to have the same profile as some of the higher profile people, where their podcast episode downloads have been 10, 20, 30, 40x what some of those big people have. And it's just because of their particular audience. They're specialized enough. They're particularly good at promoting when they appear on these shows. For example, David C. Baker, I wouldn't expect somebody like him to promote his episode with me to his audience. His audience probably don't care about that conversation. Maybe they do, but I wouldn't expect him to promote it. And so it's nice to have some of those people on, but that wouldn't be, I think that it does give credibility. And here's the thing with credibility. It's an interesting kind of psychology. But when you are interviewing those people, you're kind of elevated to the same level as those people. So if I say, hey, I have interviewed XYZ, then people will say, oh, Alastair knows all those people. And it just becomes a kind of a subtle psychological thing. And the same for you when you get these people on. And it is a very interesting psychological thing, but you are sharing the stage with those. But I think then when you think about that, I think that it's also important that the show is working for you, and so that it's meeting your goals, which is why I think that the format is important, and that possibly, like we're doing a coaching episode here, that it's important not just to platform other people, but also to platform yourself. And that could be you doing a solo episode, and you're going to be particularly good at solo episodes because you've spoken to the camera so often. But also it could be maybe having somebody like Robin, who works with you, come in and interview you about a topic.
Yeah. We've done that before, and we have a nice dynamic. Yeah. And we should actually do that more regularly. That's a great idea.
And that's a great way to platform yourself.
Yeah.
Now there are networking. There's a network effect when you bring on a guest. There is a network effect of them potentially sharing it to their audience.
And the operative word there is potentially. And that's something, I don't know whether you bump up against that, but, I make it really easy. I give people swipe copy. I give them, links to the events I've created on LinkedIn and Facebook, on YouTube. I know YouTube doesn't do it, but the other do. And I give them, as a gift when they're done, I give them the clips that I create. I share those with them and say, please use as you see fit. I would say of over 40 episodes I've had, if 2 or 3 people have used those clips, that's it. Yeah. And those are clips that make them sound really good. Those are clips where I don't even say a beat, right?
Yeah.
These are clips that highlight my guests. And it's really weird. Like we're all screaming for more content. I'm giving you 3 edited, beautifully done, I even embed the closed captioning so nothing can go wrong, and a thumbnail and all of it, swipe copy, the whole 9 yards. No.
Yeah. It's really interesting that happens. Right. And I'm not at all surprised, because that's been my experience as well. And all I can say is continue to make it as easy as possible for people. Maybe ask them beforehand in your intake form. Ask them to commit to that. And I think that the intake form is important, because you can set up a lot of things with your intake form. You can kind of foreshadow, hey, I'm going to ask you to share the clips that I create, because I've invested a lot of time in setting up the processes, and my team makes these great pieces of content for you, and so if I bring you on, I want to know that you're going to share, like, this is going to be great for you. So that's something, and so you can actually ask them, and so I think the way that my intake form does it, you've gone through it more recently than me, but I think my intake form asks you to confirm that you're going to do that, and ask you to list the social networks that you list your profiles for that reason.
Yeah.
So
I have a pretty extensive questionnaire, but that I think needs to be added in. Because even I just did an interview last week with somebody who has a really nice thing going, the real women 50 over 50. And she sent me all these links and asked me to share after the show. And I'm like, it would have been really good to know before the show, because I plan my content calendar out like a couple of months in advance. Yeah. Now I'm scrambling for a spot. And had I known sooner, I could have put that in for, let's say, next week. But now that I'm getting it, 2 days ago, I'm like, it's not going to show up until July,
Yeah. And I guess, that's going to be, it's going to depend on the guest and how organized they are and things like that. But if you've forewarned them this is going to happen, then at least they know that you're going to be making that ask. And I think it's not that big an ask when you go and make some valuable content for them that they actually post it. So I would think I think this comes back. This comes back to me for as a discussion for the format. And what we're talking about here is we're talking about a hybrid format. So in terms of formats, interview format is the kind of the default. And then solo podcasts are also pretty popular, where one person is just talking the whole time. And I think that it's so hybrid is basically a mix. And I like hybrid because it's your podcast. You do what's right for you. You're putting in a lot of time and effort into making it. Now, at the same time, I think that you must absolutely consider the audience, and that the podcast, like, there's no point in doing it if it's not in service of the audience. Like, that's got to be priority. Yeah. Priority. I don't know if I can say priority number one, but it's sharing equal priority with you. I mean, it has to be up there as an equal top priority with it working for you, the business. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so why create it if it's not for the audience, right? I don't need anything to self-aggrandize myself, right? I have so much video content out there already. That, I don't need more video. I just want to have a different format and something where I can bring, because I'm not the expert of everything, right? So bringing in other people who, and so then it's getting back to the topic, like what kind of topics would be interesting to explore other than just inviting nice people I meet who could be potential clients, right?
Yeah. So I think maybe we're coming around to talking about the title, because the title sets the scene for what the topics are and what people are going to get out of it. Because the title is kind of like, well, what's the benefit for the listener?
Yeah.
So, and so I rebranded this show. This was originally marketing for consultants, which was kind of branding done by an engineer, which it was. But I still hadn't figured out what the exact angle I was taking on it. I knew that it was around
to recognize
content.
authority, which is brilliant, right?
Yeah, and it's about building authority, becoming the recognized authority. That's the end goal for the people who listen to the podcast. At least that's why I hope they're listening to it. And so that's my North Star with the content. And even if I make solo episodes or different types of episodes, the North Star is still the North Star. And I think that's why the title is important, because it just gives you that thing that you're aiming for. And that's what aligns your business needs with your listeners' needs.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about the title? Do you want to tell me what it was, what you're thinking of? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not pushed for time here, and we're going to have one of those super long episodes that I hope people will listen to. and even if only one person listens to this all the way to the end, and it helps them with their podcast, that's great. But I would hope that a lot more people would get value out of it. So so tell me about your titles, and let's have a discussion about that.
Yeah, so titles 0. I mean, what I've been calling my last one was Real Talk with Nina, or Live Real Talk with Nina, Real REEL. So that was just the beginners. It was like the creative trying not to nail herself down with anything specific and keep it as open-ended as possible. So similar to your first title of your show. So now I think it is time for something more specific. My end goal for my clients is visibility, right? It is authority as well, right? But that's not my vocabulary. And I think my vocabulary is all around what I call the 4 C's, which is, clarity, community, consistency, and confidence with video, right? So that is sort of where I'm sitting with my buzzwords. We talk a lot about making people, like, from the unseen expert to the recognized authority, or the recognized, I shouldn't say recognized authority, I'm looking at the title of your show, the recognized expert or the visible expert. So that's sort of what that's sort of the transformation that we talk about for our clients. Yeah. So where there is a title in there, and of course, you want to have to do a title search to make sure not 50,000 other people already have a podcast with that title.
Yeah. Now, if there is a podcast out there that's defunct, that's no longer in existence, and it has the name that you want, and it's no longer live, I would just go with it. I wouldn't worry too much about that, unless they happen to have it as a registered trademark somewhere. That would be the only thing I'd really watch out for. But in terms, so what I would do here is I would brainstorm, and I would think, and actually this is where those AI tools really come into their own. You can ask tools like ChatGPT for suggestions around this, and ask it to give you a lot of suggestions, and ask it to give you suggestions where it uses alliteration, ask it to give you suggestions where it uses puns, and you can basically get a lot of different ideas from it, and just go through them and look for those that are sticking out. I mean, you're talking about visibility and you're talking about video, so there's obviously the V thing there. Real talk, obviously it's just a pun, but there's no benefit. So we're looking for, what's the benefit to the listener? Is it really clear what they're getting from it? And so I think my preference is not to use something like a pun. I prefer to go more straightforward, because you don't have a lot of space and you just want to get it across really simple. And I think it should be 4 words maximum. 3 or 2 words is better. And that's kind of what I would be looking for.
Is there like a character minimum to make sure you don't get cut off?
There are, but in terms of that, the way that I think about it, I think about when it's actually being shown on the screen. So, for example, when you're titling your episodes, I would never put the podcast title first. I'd always put what the topic is, the name of the episode in terms of the topic, and then your guest name, and then the podcast name, because that's the bit that's going to get cut off is the podcast name, but that's the bit that gets repeated for every episode. But I have seen podcasts where it was the podcast name, a conversation with, and then ... And every episode, when you looked in the podcast player, just looked like that. And it was because they had podcast name, a conversation with, guest name, and the guest name was always off the edge of the screen. So you just got to be careful of things like that. In terms of the podcast name, I think so long, like, the way I think about it is how is it going to look on the artwork? So, because that's an important thing. I would keep it short. I would avoid using your personal name in the podcast. I would say with, as like almost like a subtitle.
Okay, so the name in the subtitle.
I think that if your show is going to be really informative, should be reflected in the name rather than kind of being humorous. And the other thing that you can do is you can think about what it is that you do and then zoom out one level. So that gives you more room to evolve. So it could be. And then obviously, try it, say out loud to yourself to see how it sounds. See, is the domain available? That could be nice to have the domain. If it's not essential that it's available, but it would be nice if it was. And and then don't use the word podcast in the podcast.
Yep.
So and the other thing is you're not married to the name. If it's not your thing, you can always change it later. So
true.
I'd say. Yeah. Launch, go with your best one, and you can change it later. And like that's one of the great things about podcasts is like the feed is the feed, and if somebody subscribes to the podcast and you change the name, they're still subscribed to your podcast feed, unless you for some reason want to change your feed address, which I wouldn't recommend doing, because you could lose all your subscribers. But that the advantage, if you're happy and you've already got podcast subscribers, if they haven't deleted your podcast off their phone because it's gone quiet, if they may still have it on there, and you can just upload a new episode and with the new artwork, and they say, oh, what's this? And they go, oh, there's Nina. Okay, Nina's got a new podcast episode out. And it's all right. It's already there and good to go.
Okay.
That is one of the big advantages of the podcast feed. Yeah.
Okay. That's actually good to know, because that's very different from doing the vlogcast or the lives. Do you include in your artwork photos of your guests and yourself? Yes, no, yes.
Okay, so there's two different pieces of artwork. There is your podcast cover, which is the overall cover that goes in things like Apple Podcasts and all of those other podcast places, and that is just the podcast title for me, and the podcast title with an image. I don't include a picture of myself on there. Most of my initial listeners don't have a clue of who I am. I don't have enough profile. So if you're Gary V, sure, you put your name on there. But I think that if you're not, forget about putting a picture of you on there for now. Then you've got the episode covers. And so you can just leave it by default. You don't have to create an episode cover every time. But if you do create an episode cover, it is nice, because it means that when people are in the podcast player, they see the person's face and the name of the episode. And if you create a template for those in Canva, it's very easy to just drag and drop. Canva has these little frames, so I have a circular frame. And I just drop the headshot from the intake form, which again is just showing the importance of the intake form having the question to ask for the headshot location. And we'll just drop that in. And again, this is all hands off for me. I don't do any of this. ICO takes care of it all. And I'm sure that there's even ways we probably could even automate it. I have hooked up the intake form to Zapier to do some things like creating it. It sends us an email to get the show notes. It starts off creation of the show notes. And so you can set that kind of thing up. if you do try and make it as low friction as possible, because there is, I think that you're experienced enough with video production, things like that, to know that every time you add an extra step in, that extra step has to be done every single time. It's just adding a little bit more friction, and the whole system can become a bit unwieldy. So I would say try not to make it too complex. Try and keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah,
and I think I like to keep Pareto principle 80-20 in mind as much as possible.
And I tend to I try to go for perfect. That's just my Swiss
The other
background.
thing that you can do is you can get experimental with it, and you can say, okay, this is going to be a fixed length season of 8 episodes. And so season 1 was the initial go. This is now season 2, and season 2 is going to have eight episodes. And at the end of 8 episodes, or 10 episodes, or 100 episodes, whatever you want to make it, we're going to stop and reevaluate. We're going to look: is the title working for us? Is the format working? Is the length of it working? Are we happy with the types of guests that we're inviting? All of those different things. And a season break gives you a natural break to make changes. And if you, again, foreshadowing, you tell people, hey, this is episode 6 of season 2. We're going to be taking a short hiatus of 2 weeks at the end of season 2. And we're going to evaluate these things. And then we're going to come back with season 3, after Easter, or after the, midterm break, or whatever it is, And you're setting people up. You're letting them know. It's really important to let them know if you're going to go on hiatus. It's really important to let them know a few episodes in advance. So you just mention that a couple of times so that they know, okay, and they're not shocked when you disappear or there's no new episode the next week. Because, again, hopefully people are planning and putting your podcast into their schedule, because that's what we really want is people to have such trust and appreciation for what we're doing. And so, again, this comes back to the podcast being in service of them.
Yeah, that's very different from a live. You're either there or you're not. No one really cares. And that actually is really interesting. So yeah, probably seasons wouldn't be bad. Also, just to give yourself a summer break, a Christmas break, whatever.
Yeah.
So you keep mentioning weekly.
Yeah.
What about monthly?
So the reason why I like weekly is it's a short enough interval that people don't forget about you, and they do things every week. Whereas monthly it's a bit more infrequent, and it just doesn't. I think that you don't get the schedule benefits. You don't get the benefit of being part of their schedule in the same way. So I still think it's monthly is better than nothing.
Yeah.
But if you can, and you can get ahead of your schedule, so you can batch up. I got way ahead of my schedule at one point with lots of episodes batched up, and then I had the opposite. I went to the States actually for 3 weeks. And then when I came back, I didn't have an episode scheduled, and then somebody canceled last minute, and suddenly for the first time I was at risk of not actually having a full episode. So I recorded a short snippet to put out and say, hey, I don't have an episode. But that was the first time in 120 episodes or whatever that I didn't have a full episode to put out. So
I actually had just 3 people cancel on me back to back.
When that happens, that's life. And it is your podcast, so you get to make the rules. Yes, you're doing it in service of your audience, but you want to make it work for you as well. And
so then if I was, bunching up on them, because I want to do it as a live, because lives perform really well on LinkedIn. Yeah. That ties me into a schedule. So would you then say, even if I do, let's say two, if I do some lives in advance, hold them back and release them, basically do a couple of lives to hold on to. So I have a couple of lives.
I think it's okay. So I've surveyed my email list about this. I've asked people about it. I've asked for feedback, because I was concerned, because I do record them live on video. And now I haven't really been promoting the lives hard. In fact, sometimes I haven't even set up events for them. I just hit go live without any pre-advance. And I probably need to get better at that, but that's because I was coming to it from a podcasting first rather than a live stream first viewpoint. So that's something that I certainly could improve on here. But what I think is, if you are going live, some of the people who listen to your podcast will also have seen the live. And the feedback I got was, I was a bit disappointed because I'd already seen you on LinkedIn, and then I got the podcast episode and it was the same. But I think that crossover is going to be rare. I think that people aren't going to mind it. I think that's a nice problem to have. Exactly. Yeah. So I wouldn't worry about that, to be honest, at the start. And maybe people catch the live and they only catch the end of it, and you're providing them the whole episode. So I think that's good. The only thing to remember is that when you are recording a live, you're almost certainly recording a video, and so it's just worthwhile remembering that people who are listening to it may not have video, and sometimes that's important. So most of the time it's not, but if you know in advance that's the case, that's fine. I do tend to refer to it as the show now instead of the podcast. So that's a nice ambiguous word.
I like the show as well. I like that wording better. Yeah, I mean, the only thing that bothers me, I mean, I wouldn't even consider podcasting if there was a way to watch a YouTube video with sound only without losing the video when you close the YouTube app, right? And the nice thing about a podcast is I can listen to something while I'm still driving and seeing my GPS, or while, there's a podcast allows for different kind of interaction over, putting it on YouTube, because the moment I close the YouTube app, it stops the video. And that to me is a problem. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. There's so much I could go on for quite a bit longer. But
are there any other burning questions? Can you I'm okay to go on, another 15 minutes if you want to do that. If you're finding this useful. What are the burning questions for you?
I mean, the burning questions, other than the title, is I think the title also is what will focus me on what kind of people I invite, and I think having a purpose. So I think the burning question is, you have this whole ecosystem, right? And you have that amazing graphic that I love showing to people, which I probably have a much too old version of, where, people are generalists and then they're specialists and then they're experts. And then
journey to authority.
Authority, right?
Yeah. That
to me is just an absolutely brilliant concept. And I teach that concept to my people because I think they need to be aware of it, right?
Cool.
And because it justifies my work with them, because I help them get, I sort of grab them normally at the expert stage, and help them to get to the authority stage. So I have a similar ecosystem, which I've been working on for half a year, and I keep saying I'm going to publish it, and I still, the perfectionist in me, who does not believe in the 80-20 rule, although I should believe in the 80-20 rule, keeps tinkering with it. I really want to make sure that my podcast or my show is not just I see so many people, so many of my clients even, who just do content as an exercise of duty and not with brilliant strategy, even if we ask them about it over and over again and make sure that they kind of get it and blah, blah, blah. So I want to make sure that this is not a exercise in, I have a show. I want this to be an exercise in, this is a brilliant add-on tool that I'm using to educate my audience and to benefit me, to help me grow and be an authority. And that is, so I'd rather delay the launch of this. I have a launch date set for myself. I'd rather delay that launch by a month, 2 months, 3 months, and get it right. Yeah.
So I agree with both of those, but I would be wary of that over delay. I think that, now I think that, we have very different philosophies on things in terms of that way of approaching it. I think that it's important to start before you're ready, because if you don't start before you're ready, you'll never be ready.
Yeah, I know. And that's what I tell my clients too, right?
Yeah. And the best way to get ready is to get experience. And you only get experience by starting. So it's catch-22. So I do think that people should jump in before they're ready. Now, I know that you're much more experienced than somebody starting this for the very first time who's no experience of production and content and things like that. But the other thing that you were talking about is, kind of passion for the topic. And I think that when you really love what you're talking about and you really enjoy talking about it and you enjoy the people who you're talking to, the listener will appreciate that. They'll understand that. They'll feel the passion in your voice, and it makes it easier for you. Also, it means that you're not going to burn out in the same way. That it makes it much easier to kind of carry through, particularly through the fallow period. And there is with podcasting, it's really tough, particularly at the start. We didn't really talk about promotion too much, but I think that if you're thinking at all about promoting the podcast in terms of paid promotion, then I would urge you to do that as close to start as possible. Once you've got a few episodes on the podcast feed, a few of your newer episodes there to show that it's alive, I would suggest that you put a little bit of money into that in terms of
promoting
podcast ads. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, that's a whole other topic. I'll cover with you some other time, I guess. Would it be just sort of cycling back for a hot second? You had mentioned seasons. So, I mean, I have 40 interviews. Should I put those up or should I select like my top 5 or 10 and put those up as season 1?
So we talked about you having a podcast there already. Is that still in existence? Are you happy with the podcast hosting company that you're using? Things like that? Or are you
I don't have a podcast hosting, so I've never podcasted ever before. So
okay, right now I understand.
There's zero.
So you've got these pre-recorded shows that you already have, but they've got slightly different branding. But
well, they're real talk. It's a real talk with Nina show that has been only a LinkedIn Live, sometimes Facebook, sometimes not, because Facebook doesn't always cooperate, and YouTube, right? So I have a playlist on YouTube. Yeah. Which is about 40 videos deep. And I have all the lives on LinkedIn, and I have all the endless micro content.
Yeah, so you've got tons of content already. I think you definitely could do a weekly show. And so what you could do is, you've already got these interviews. You can repurpose those interviews very easily as podcast episodes. Just strip out the audio. You could pre-record record a new intro to those so that people know that it's, they know that it's the podcast, the new podcast name. What I did when I rebranded the podcast, we got all of the old podcast episodes. There was only 20 actually with the old branding, and I just recorded a short clip saying, "Hey, this is Alastair. You're going to hear the old branding on the podcast episode you're about to hear, but it's actually the podcast has been renamed," and I just kind of explained that. And then I said, "Oh yeah, and by the way, all of the content, all the stuff that we talked about is evergreen and is still as relevant to you now as it was." That might be something that you might want to add. That's the only thing I think that, or you could just drop it in. You could just drop it in. I think I would probably.
No, I don't mind doing an I mean, you would have to pre-record it and put it in, as an edit.
Yeah. That's the only part. But it does. It gives some context for that.
40. I would pick my 5 favorite or my 10 favorite. And I mean, you could do all 40 if you wanted to, and I think that if I was doing it that way, I'd probably drip them in. I wouldn't like drop all 40 at once, and I wouldn't drop those 40 before you start to do new ones. So I would do a new one, and then I would do one of your favorites, and then do a new one and do one of your favorites, something like that, and kind of mix them up like that. Yeah, I mean, I could have the legacy version of XYZ new podcast, right? Yeah,
I mean, so the what I'm trying to get at with this is you want to make sure that people know that the information that they're getting from this is still as relevant as it was when it was recorded. That all of those things are still relevant. Now, that means that there might be things where if you refer to platform specifics, then maybe those kind of things may have changed. the YouTube algorithm or the Instagram algorithm as it pertains to, video content or something like that. So maybe there is something like that. But I think knowing your content, I would say most of it is probably evergreen, which is good.
I think so too. And I know there's a couple of episodes that I still use the clips from, although they're 2 years old, because they're just so brilliant and reusable, right? Yeah.
But that's the brilliant thing about creating great evergreen content, is that you can do that,
Yeah. And I have been.
And you can reuse it again. The all of this content, you can use it over and over again. And ideally not yourself. Somebody else is doing it for you.
Yeah. I mean, I have a great editor, and he also has some audio experience. So, yeah. Yeah.
The other question I had for you is, are you hooking this up to your website? Will you set up a podcast page on your website? I strongly urge that you do, because make it easier for people to.
I haven't even gotten that far yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are tools that will. So there's two ways to approach it. The first way is to automatically add episodes to your website, so that when you put up a new episode, it gets picked up. Your website notices, hey, there's a new podcast episode on the feed, and it's automatically added. And that's very hands-off, frictionless.
Okay.
The other way is to do it manually, where you add the episodes manually. And what you can do when you do it manually is you can add more context. So you can add the transcript, you can add other show notes or guest bios and things like that. And the advantage of that is you can do a bit more because if you do the automatic way, it just picks up the show notes that are in the episode in the podcast.
And I cannot go in and edit it after?
You can, but it's not as easy to do. So it's it's tricky. It depends on which system you use. There are different systems that you can use for this. I do it manually, and again, I delegate it. I don't want to do it myself, but I just find now I'm a website guy. That's my background. So doing the website stuff is easier for me and my team, because that's our background. But I do have clients who do the podcast, the automated system, because they want it as frictionless as possible.
Yeah. Would a software like Libsyn, I think it's called?
Libsyn is the podcast host, and so it will support that. In fact, all of the podcast hosts, the way the podcasting works is there's a feed which is updated every time you publish a new episode. Your podcast feed gets updated, and what happens is all of these different services, basically, they just poll that feed to check, hey, has it been updated? And they usually poll that feed at an interval, like they might poll it once an hour or something like that. And so and I think actually what happens is if you publish on a regular, consistent basis, they know when you're going to post, so they poll it just after you've posted, just to check, so they know that it's there. That's getting a bit nerdy about it, and I hope I'm not over explaining that, but it just means that that gets picked up pretty quickly, and it's on your website straight away,
So then this brings me to another question, which is, if I wanted to alternate, let's say I do a weekly because that's what we're supposed to do, blah, 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 but I don't want to deal with guests every week. What if I did once a month a guest, once a month me talking by myself to the microphone, once a month something with Robin, and then maybe once a month, I don't know, maybe 2 guests a month, one Robin, one me alone, something like that. Can I do that all under the same umbrella, or would you consider those different podcasts that should go under different feeds?
So me personally, my viewpoint on all of this, and I've got this in the book quite a few times, is it's your podcast. You do what you want. And I think that is absolutely fine. So long as those, so I would call those solo episodes when it's just you. And the other ones, I personally, I call them guest host, because it's somebody comes on as a guest host, so it's rather than me hosting it, I've got a guest host in, and I've done that quite a few times with my my good friend and ex-business partner Alastair McDermott. He's come in and he's interviewed me several times on the podcast when I wanted to have a conversation about something in particular, and that's been great because we already have a good relationship. We get on, and so we know each other very well. And so what we're able to do is have a nice rapport. Exactly, I think that's really important.
Yeah, which I would so doing it with Robin would be a guest host situation.
Yeah, that's personally what I would call it. I don't actually know if there's an official name for that, but I would call it guest host. And so I would have a guest host episode, I would have a solo episode, and then you would have your regular interviews. And by the way, with those regular interviews, there are two options. So you can interview, you can interview authorities and experts, but you can also do things like what we're doing here. You can do coaching style episodes. You can interview, or you can have conversations with potential clients, for example. And you can make those interviews, but you can use the podcast to bring on a potential client and interview them. And it's a great way to build a relationship with somebody. By platforming them effectively, So it's not just about bringing on high profile people who are experts in their field. And I think that those coaching style, which is why I was really happy that you asked me to do this, because I think that these are really useful for people to hear, because they get to, if somebody is thinking about planning a podcast, this hopefully is a really interesting conversation for them.
Yep. And I'm sorry that my thoughts are all over the frickin' place, but that's just how my brain works. Yeah, I like this idea a lot because for me also having a format in mind, having different styles in mind, helps me then focus in on. I think my inspiration for a title and content has to come from that ecosystem that I've been building, right? Yeah. Because that is. Our aim is always the same, which is giving visibility to small businesses that otherwise wouldn't have a seat at the table. That is really what I'm all about. And
it's visibility through video, something like that.
Which is not the sexiest title, but it is a nice alliteration.
Not really. Yeah. So I mean, something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you're right. You're absolutely right. Although I like my C's. I'm partial because clockwise C.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
But anyway, this is so much. It's on one hand, it's just so much clarity. On the other hand, I'm like, whew.
It's more work to do. It is more work to do. Now, there is one thing. There's one thing I can give you that might be useful for you and for the listener. Is I have a free workbook for podcast creation. And
there we go. That's what I want.
It's part of my resources pack. So if somebody buys the book 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Your Business Podcast, in the book there's resources, but actually I'm going to make it available in the show notes for everybody who listens to this in case they want it. So I'm going to put that one for. And there's a very famous TV show here where they say. There's one for everybody in the audience. That's what they say on the TV show.
That's everybody in the audience. Digital download.
So I'll put that in the show notes and the workbook, and that might help with this as well, because just when you go through it, there might be something there, and also it brings you through it in the right format and the right priorities. I think that's the priorities for me are, what are your goals as a business and as a person, and what is the audience? How is it serving the audience? I think if you keep those two things key, then everything else will fall into line with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I mean, that's how all content that we're creating should be thought about, right? So, it makes total sense. And now, of course, I'm thinking like, but I have this rhythm of working week 1, 2, and 3, always taking off the 4th week. I mean, I don't take off, but I don't do classes. And I'm thinking about maybe whether I want to post something on the 4th week, but you
can schedule this. Yeah, you can schedule this, and so you can schedule these to go out in advance. And that's the great thing about the scheduling tools is you could, if you wanted, in whatever hosting company that you use, you can schedule these things to go out at whatever time. And so I'm a big fan as well of batching. I think we both understand batching is the way to efficient content.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking maybe not all of these need to be lives, right? So maybe that 4th week never is a live. Maybe that 4th week
So for example, most of my podcast episodes now are broadcast live. but we decided not to broadcast this one live because we wanted to record it and see does it make for a good episode first, and I think that it does. So I'd like to use it, but we agreed that we're recording it in a different way because of that. So we're recording it on a different tool rather than going live, and so you can make that decision. Ultimately, the person who's listening to this on a podcast player with their the earphones on, or listen to it in their car, or they're doing the dishes or chopping up peppers for dinner, ultimately it doesn't really matter how it was recorded for them, so long as it sounds good. And that is one thing that I would say to you is think about getting a bigger, better microphone, or moving it closer to it. Yeah, I know a camera.
I have a really nice, expensive microphone,
right?
And it's sitting with all the other equipment I never use in my freaking closet.
We got to get you using that. I know that I have this big microphone in front of me on camera, and I know that like a lot of video people
phallic,
they like to remove it because yes, it can look phallic, yes, of course, but it does sound better. And
yes, I know it does. Yeah.
If we're going to be in service to the listener, I think it's incumbent on us to make it sound as good as possible.
All right, you're making me crank out my Yeti. I even bought two. I have one in Switzerland as well. So when I'm there,
cool.
I don't have a Yeti in Switzerland because the Yeti, you can kill somebody with it. It weighs like 5 pounds. But I don't even know whether it's the best microphone. But I wanted something that also looked cool because in the end.
Yeah. Well, I do have some podcast equipment recommendations in the workbook, and I have actually a whole separate guide for that, which I'll link in the show notes as well. The Yetis are good, but possibly too good, in the sense that they can pick up too much, and sometimes we're recording in less than ideal environments. For example, I live near a small airport here, and sometimes the pilots go up to do training, or there's one guy who does aerobatics, I don't know what you call that, but anyway, so my microphone doesn't pick it up most of the time.
That's what we call it.
All looped like it's like an air show out there sometimes. But you want a microphone that only picks up stuff that's close to it, and that's why there's a particular type of technology. There's two types of mics. There's dynamic range and there's condenser microphones. Condenser microphones are brilliant if you've got a soundproofed environment. If you don't, then maybe you want to go with dynamic range, because a dynamic range microphone will not pick up stuff like the dog barking next door. So that's the advantage of that. So when you said Blue Yeti, I was thinking about that because they have really good condenser microphones, but it maybe just not the most appropriate one for you. So just
especially not in New York City, where there's a fire engine out there every other second. By the way, Zoom, I don't know whether it's just Zoom, but lately when we've been on Zoom, things don't pick up. I think Zoom has changed their recording technology.
Interesting. Yeah. So I do record.
I made a joke about the sirens, and I'm like, oh look, this is proof that I'm not lying, I'm actually in New York. And I had a room of 30 people who all looked at me like with a blank face because they had no clue what I was talking about.
Well and that's great.
The host told me afterwards, she's like, we didn't hear the sirens. I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, I do occasionally, for convenience, I do actually even record on Zoom. Now, I tend only to do that with the highest profile guests. If I think that they're not very technical, I don't want to introduce friction by asking them to use my recording service and allowing the upload to complete, which is necessary on this recording service. You got to let the upload complete. That gives us a higher quality. Zoom is more convenient. And so, for example, when I was talking to Alan Weiss, I asked him, I didn't ask him, I just got on Zoom and I was happy to be there. So
exactly.
That's
also with this, when I hang up, I need to wait until the upload thing is 100% and not
yeah, absolutely. So so that's it. I think we've covered like 99% of the really key things. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you still have as a burning question?
No, I think we've covered more than I thought we needed to cover. So I'm super happy. I know I'm going to rewatch this for sure, and I have some notes, and I have more than enough to think about. I mean, my next questions, and this is not for now because I don't have the I don't even want to go there right now. It's going to be like, you know, what podcast service to use. I mean,
I've got some recommendations again in the workbook,
and they change, I'm sure. Also,
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, but most of the big ones are pretty good. I wouldn't go with somebody tiny. You don't need to go with the biggest ones, and find something that works for your budget. And you know, that they all have different. Some of them will do things like automated transcriptions, and like I think Libsyn are bringing in.
Otter. I mean, I don't really need that. Yeah.
Some of them will automatically level your podcast now in terms of the normalization, the audio levels, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are things like that you can use as well. So that, you know, it's worthwhile looking at some different options. So I've got a bunch of options in that workbook as well. So I'll send that on.
Awesome.
Okay,
Alastair, this is phenomenal. Thank you.
Hey, if you're interested in working with me directly and having me help out with your business, I'd be delighted to talk. So if you check under wherever you found this video, you'll probably find a link. And you can also find it if you go to therecognizedauthority.com. You'll find a link on there to work with me as a coach. It's just called coaching. So I hope to work with you if you're interested. And if you got something from this video, I really hope that you got some insight, something that helped you with your business. And I'd be delighted to talk to you and figure out if I'm a good fit to work with you. So check out therecognizedauthority.com and see you in the next video.